Please join me in welcoming LaToya Hobbs.
Hi. First, I want to just take the time to thank all of you for being here today. It's a beautiful Saturday, and I hear this is ideal weather from Milwaukee, so there's so many other places you can be, but I'm thankful that you chose to spend this time with me today. Thank you to Nikki and all of the amazing staff here at the museum. It's been a pleasure to be here so far. Thank you for all the hospitality that you've given to me and my family. So for my talk today, I'm going to be talking about an embodiment of joy, rest, and renewal. Last year, I had the pleasure of reading the book Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration by Tracy McKell Lewis Gidgets. And so using her book as inspiration, I'm going to be talking about how joy is present in my work. And I think we all could use a little bit of joy with everything that's happening in the world right now. So before I talk about the work, I do just want to take time just to acknowledge my family. And again, you know, my name is LaToya, originally from Arkansas, born and raised. I'm a mom, artist, and all these things. But I really think my family is so important and integral to everything that I do, as you can see from the work that is on display. So I just want to take time to acknowledge them. I also have family who drove here from Michigan to be with us today. So again, thank you so much for everybody who came, and people who came from Baltimore. So again, thank you for your presence. So the teacher in me, I just want to take a little bit to talk about printmaking, just because I feel like of all the ways that artists create and make things, people are generally less knowledgeable about printmaking and all that goes into the process of making a set of works on paper. So I'm gonna just walk through how to make a print, and hopefully a minute or less to save time on my presentation. So the first thing with printmaking, it is an addition where you make multiples of something, and typically you use that with a matrix. So the matrix is whatever surface that you're going to be working on. So if you're doing lithography, you use a stone. If you're doing etching, you use some type of like copper or metal plate. In the type of printmaking that I do, which is called relief or woodcut, you use a piece of wood. So here you can see this image, you can see my wood block. So with this particular work, it's going to be a multi-layer print. There's lots of ways that you can print, but typically if you have multiple colors, you need a block for every print. So this print is gonna have 2 layers, so you see 2 blocks. Also, you see kind of a bit of my process. So I always start by painting my wood blocks black first, and then I do a detail drawing with a white pencil. So that just kind of helps me to see what the work looks like earlier in the process. So typically I do a lot of like black and white prints, so it just makes sense to start in black and white from the beginning. So after your image is done, then you go into like carving. So here you can see that the blocks are carved, right? So you see 2 colors already forming, right? So the black, which would represent where the ink would be, and then whatever's carved away, it's representing like the surface of the wood. That's also gonna translate into the white of the paper when it's printed. All right, so now that the blocks are fully carved, we go into printing. And so typically you print whatever your lightest color is first. In this instance, the lightest color is gold, so I start with my gold block, and you can see here, ink table with the ink slab, a roller or a brayer is what we use to lay out the ink can, and then you can also see an image of the prints on the dryer rack. So this is the first layer. And so when I show those 2 previous images, you really have to coordinate your drawing and carving so that when you put all the layers together, everything shows up where you want it to show up. All right, next I'm printing the black layer, or this is called the key block. So the key block is where like the most important information is in your image. And then here we can see me printing both of the layers together. So I took the same piece of paper that the gold layer is printed on, and now I'm printing that same piece of paper on top of the key block or the black layer. And then you put the paper on the press bed, and then you pull it up and pray that everything came out the way that you wanted it to come out. And then if it's all good, you have a print and you're very happy, like I am here in this picture. So you have to do that for every single work in the edition, right? So if there's an edition of 50, you have to do that 50 times for each piece of paper. And then if you have like a 5-color print or a 10-color print, you have to do that for every step. So Okay, so now that you guys are all printmaking experts, I'm going to talk about just a little bit of my practice. So as I was mentioned in my introduction, I study painting and printmaking, and I like to identify myself as both of those things, a painter and a printmaker. I don't really just kind of call myself a mixed media artist, although I do mixed media. I really think about I'm drawing on those very specific things, so painting and printmaking together. So I'm going to show you some of my early works. We may have some students in the audience, so I always like to show, like, doesn't matter where you start, you're going to get better, okay? So this is I consider this painting important because it was like one of my first like really successful paintings. This is oil on canvas. It's a portrait of one of my friends from Arkansas named Clarice. So kind of exemplary of the type of imagery that I'm interested in creating. I do a lot of portrait works. And at the time, I was really fascinated with halos. So you see that happening a lot in my earlier works. And also sometimes it pops back up in my current work. And then here are examples of two of what I would consider like my first successful woodcuts. And so I always get the question of like, why did I go into printmaking? I was kind of forced to be honest. When I decided to commit to being an artist, though I was a painting major, I had to take printmaking as a part of one of my requirements for my coursework in my degree. But eventually after taking that class, which I initially thought was useless because, you know, I'm a painter, I don't have to take printmaking. But I eventually fell in love with the medium, especially after being introduced to the work of Elizabeth Catlett. So I kind of developed this love affair with printmaking toward the end of my undergraduate degree, and then I decided that I wanted to study that more extensively when I went to graduate school. So this is like one of the first paintings that I did in graduate school. So you can kind of see same type of imagery, but I'm kind of experimenting with pattern now, experimenting with this idea of layering and transparency. And you can see that carry over into the print work as well. So this is another portrait of my friend Clarice, titled Clarice 2. So you can kind of see some of the main elements that are visible in my work. The figure is something that I never compromise on, so I always have the figure, but I also like to bring in other elements just to add just a different type of visual interest to the work and a visual imagery. So these are Adinkra symbols. A lot of the patterns that I use in my work are based on Adinkra symbols, but I kind of take inspiration from patterns like all different types of places. So here are a couple of more images of woodcuts. At this point, I also kind of did a drastic increase in the scale of my work, which was a personal challenge going into graduate school, particularly with my printmaking work. And this next image, I think this image is really important because it's kind of a precursor to the work that I do now in terms of this idea of combining both my painting and printmaking work together. So this is a mixed media work. You can see there's carving, painting, collage, so kind of taking all the various things that I do and putting them together on the same surface. And now we see a current work. So through these slides, you can kind of see the evolution of my practice. And again, really thinking about this idea of the matrix as the art object. So I do still work traditionally with my printmaking work, but I'm really excited about creating these kind of hybrid works, right? So they're pulling out elements of the things that I enjoy most about being a printmaker, which is the carving itself. And then also pulling out things that are really indicative of my identity as a painter. So this is a mixed media work. It leads a little bit more towards my identity as a printmaker, but we can also look at this piece, Queen Anne. It's a portrait of my mother. It's still mixed media, but you can also see that it leans a little bit closer toward my identity as a painter. This work is also important because I use it to pay homage not only to my mother, but also to my art mothers. It represents another trend that I kind of do in my work, which is referencing other artists. So in the background of this work, if any of you guys are familiar with like your art history, you should know these two people. So one is a reference to Elizabeth Catlett, who I mentioned earlier was a really big influence on my practice. And then the other painting behind my mom's head is a reference to Samela Lewis, who has been really important just in shaping the Black art canon. Also amazing printmaker and artist herself. Okay, so now kind of getting more into the subject of my work. So I'm going to just kind of read this quick definition of joy. It reads, joy, the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires. And I'm going to also present to you this quote that was taken from the book I mentioned earlier. It says, "There is freedom in being able to choose what joy looks like." So I think when we think of joy, we typically think of an image like this, right? This piece is titled Chateaubriand's Joy, another portrait of one of my friends. And ironically, this is one of the only portraits that I have of somebody smiling. But yeah, so I think, this is kind of typical of what we think about as joy. But I feel like because we are all multifaceted people, we have so many different experiences, joy can manifest itself in different ways. Joy can be this, so kind of somber moments. This is an image of me caring for now my oldest son, but this was him when he was a baby. This work is titled Arc of Safety, Mother and Child. I'm also showing this work because, again, it gives another reference to Elizabeth Catlett. So this image was taken by my husband. As we mentioned, he's also an artist, but he's also really supportive of me in my practice in terms of doing photography for me. So this image was taken, and I didn't do anything to change our pose and position or anything, but when I was decided to do this image and make it into a piece of work, I was like, I've seen this somewhere before. And I just happened to be flipping through my phone, and I remember that I had this image by Elizabeth Catlett stored in my phone as well. So kind of piggybacking off of this and then using it as inspiration. But joy can also look like this, being completely unbothered by everything that is happening around you. Just kind of like you're home and just I'm not fazed by anything that's happening out in the world. Joy can also be this. This piece is titled Prosper, to do well, succeed, or thrive. And when I see this person, I just I think fierceness. I can remember a conversation earlier with a gentleman. He was kind of commenting on my work, how nobody's smiling and everybody looks kind of mean. I was like, they're not mean, they're fierce, right? So that was my response. So also joy can look like this, just this kind of confidence and self-assuredness. So that kind of brings me into the next topic that I'm going to segue into, joy as knowing, a spiritual exercise. When I think about the notion of joy, one of my first times of experiencing it is through church. So I can think about hymns, I have a few on the screen. I get joy when I think about, see, yes. Or this joy that I have, the world didn't give it, the world can't take it away. And then something else that I have kind of adopted as a framework of thought is that joy is based on what you know in your spirit. Happiness is based on happenings. So for me, this next work, titled Stargazer Theo, it kind of is representative of this idea of kind of spirituality, which runs through my work. As I mentioned, I'm from Arkansas, and so growing up in the South, it's the Bible Belt. So church is a part of your life, whether you want it to be or not, whether you go to church every Sunday or you just show up on Easter and Mother's Day, church is present. But this work for me really represents this idea of aspiration or hope. It's a series that I'm continuing to develop. It started with this first image of my youngest son, Theo, with this upward gaze. And I wanted to kind of give this implication that light is shining down on them. And that light can mean so many different things. It can mean hope. It can mean joy. It can mean aspiration. But I'm continuing this series. The second image is of my oldest son, Ade, because if you do one child, you have to do the other, right? But I'm continuing this series by doing all the young boys in my family. A lot of my work kind of centers around my perspective as a woman, and I tend to do portraits of a lot of women. But I feel like I want to kind of show this idea of aspiration and hope for the future through these young men and young boys in my family. So if I were to kind of associate these works with the scripture, it would be Psalms 121, 1 and 2. It says, I lift up mine eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? It comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Okay, so here I'm just going to read a little bit of an excerpt from Black Joy, the book I mentioned that is inspiring this talk. It reads, it was made real in my memories of church ladies rocking back and forth, front to back, in the Black churches of my childhood. The way they stumped a hole in the floor and screamed out in pure elation or agony, depending on the Sunday. I've come to realize that they instinctively knew how to move that trauma out of our bodies. It was physiologically the way we healed ourselves. And maybe that's how we were able to not only survive with our humanity intact, but also retain our joy. And that comes from chapter 8, titled We've Always Known, The Black Somatic Experience. So when I was reading this book, it automatically made me think about the next two works that I'm going to share. This piece is titled How Janetta Taught Us to Pray. It's another portrait of my mother, Angela. And again, also just reflective of just my identity as a woman, growing up in the South, and just our sense of spirituality, and just my kind of religious upbringing. But it's also meant to honor my grandmother, Janetta. And she is kind of the head matriarch in our family, and kind of the reason that that sense of spirituality has been passed down from her to my mother, and now to me. So this pieces are kind of remind me of a story that my mom told me about when she was younger, how my grandma used to wake them up real early in the morning, and they had to get in the living room and they had to pray and say a scripture. And I was like, wow, we had to do the same thing. So just kind of this idea of things being passed down from generation to generation. And so here is the second part of that work, or accompanied piece to that work, How Janetta Taught Us How to Pray Too. And this is a portrait of me. And so we have both of the works together. So again, just thinking about this idea of legacy, right? So thinking about what has been passed down to me, but also as a mom, what am I now passing down to my children? Okay, this next section, I'm going to be talking about joy as rest. And I'm just going to read this excerpt. So it says, rest as if your life depends on it, no matter what, regardless. This is how we will thrive. And so this is taken from the book, Rest is Resistance, a manifesto by Tricia Hersey, founder of the NAP ministry. So if I were to recommend a companion book for Black joy, it would be this. So this book was really important to me. I actually was reading this book maybe a few months before I started reading the book Black Joy, because I kind of just found myself in this place where I was just really exhausted, really exhausted. I've been thankful for the momentum that I've been able to gain in my career over the past few years, but at the same time, it does take a toll on you. So I've kind of been trying to retrain myself and learning how to rest as hard as I've trained myself to work. So I'm going to continue with a little bit from the book. It says, who is resting for? Rest is for the weary, for the hand workers, for those trying to make a way, for those making a way yet still suffering from disconnection, for those wondering when they will be able to get a full night's sleep, for those thinking they aren't worthy enough to sleep and don't deserve rest because they've been socialized to believe this, for the faith workers and those out on the front lines, to those raising children and trying to do what's best, to the entrepreneur, to the unemployed, to the blue-collar worker, to the white-collar worker, to those brainwashed by a system that has taught you aren't enough unless you produce. Rest is for all of us, a global movement for all of us to be able to tap back into our divinity. Rest is your divine right. It is not a luxury or a privilege. So kind of thinking about that framework going into these next few images. So this piece that I'm going to show you is titled In Need of Rest. This work is special because just at the time, again, I was just feeling really worn out and tired. So, as artists, we tend to make work that reflects our experiences. But this is a double-sided folded print. So I have a little reveal here. So you can see the outside, right? And then the inside. I'll do it again because you guys made such a nice noise. So this work was a part of, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am part of Black Women of Print collective, and so every year we do a portfolio. So for our 2024 portfolio, this was the work I contributed. Go to the next. So here now we can see the work. Again, you can have an outside view and the front view. So for me personally, this work kind of speaks to not only what was my personal experience, but also this idea of the strong Black woman that a lot of people are suffering for. And I don't think that's even just, like only Black women, but I feel like all women can kind of relate to that experience, right? So on the outside, it looks all shiny and polished and put together, but on the inside, it's like, whoo, child. So all of these are like 3 images of myself, but again, just kind of embodying this idea of like being in need of rest. And that also carries over into these next works. So this piece is titled Note to Self, There is Rest for the Weary. This is another mixed media work. Again, showing parts of myself as a painter and a printmaker. And then a companion piece to this is Note to Self, Joy Comes in the Morning. And again, just a reflection of the idea and also the passage that I just wrote that like we all are deserving of the opportunity to rest, and your value is not, dependent on what you produce. So these images were I was kind of hesitant to make these images just because I feel like we're encouraged to make a certain type of work when we're Black artists, we're expected to we're uplifting, we're powerful, we're strong, we're all these things. But sometimes like the honest thing is that we're just not, right? So it was kind of a long time before I actually worked with these images. These images were almost from maybe, I want to say 5, 6 years ago, but now I'm just kind of bringing them to the forefront because I feel like we should be able to talk about all parts of our identity and all parts of our experience because they're all valid. But even, that I'm showing these kind of, I don't even want to call them distressed, but I feel like even though I'm kind of showing these, what could be challenging images, there's always still this kind of like reminder of hope or reminder of like joy, right? Note to self, joy does come in the morning. I may be experiencing something right now, but there is a way that can turn. And I feel like the light that's happening in this piece is also representative of that as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna still thinking about like this idea of joy, but I'm gonna talk a little bit more about Carving Out Time because that is the work that is on display. So I'm gonna read this quote again, it's from the book, Black Joy. It says, "I do know that shifting the way we see time is directly linked to the way we view and ultimately process joy." So before I actually show images of the work, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind that piece. So the scale of the work, which is one of the big draws of that piece, the scale of this work was directly inspired by this print that I'm showing in the slide by Carrie James Marshall. So in this slide, we have a young LaToya from 2014. So this was my first time experiencing this work. It was at the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans as a part of the 30 Americans exhibit. And so I was just completely blown away by the scale and the grandeur of this work. My husband, who was like the most amazing supporter, he was like, "Yeah, you can do that. You should do something like that." I was like, "Yeah, right." But I saw the work again in 2019 at the Rubles Museum. So here you can kind of almost see like a full, the work at its full size. But by this time I was, further along in my practice, more confident in my skill set. And I was already, kind of in this vein of thinking about my work and really thinking about myself as a mother and a wife and an artist and all the roles that I play. And so by the time I got home from viewing that work, this was December of 2019, I decided that I was going to create something of my own on this large scale. And I eventually came to the idea that I would use my life as the inspiration for the work. So here is one of the first scenes of Carving Out Time, and I like to describe this work as a portrait of my day. Again, it takes you through a day in my life from start to finish. And so it's one work in 5 parts. So if you think about like acts in a play, right? A play is one play, but then there's act 1, act 2, act 3. So the work is divided and organized in that way. So this first scene is titled Carving Out Time, Scene 1, Morning. So it just kind of shows you the start of the day and introduces all of the major characters in the production, so to speak. And this particular image is shown in the studio that I was working in at the time in Baltimore, Maryland. So this next slide, it just kind of gives you an up-close look to kind of break down my process a little bit more, because I get a lot of questions about process when I'm showing this work. And so here you can see that the wood panels, one, I work with them on the wall. upright, just because they're so large. I have to get back from them to be able to take everything in and really see the image develop. But the panels, the cherry wood panels, are painted black first, and I do a really detailed drawing with a white pencil. So you can kind of see bits and pieces of each part of the process here. And then once the drawing is fully developed and I have like my plan mapped out, then I kind of start the carving process. And typically the rule is that I start with whatever the brightest object is that is also closest to the viewer. And then after the carving and carving and carving, and then you have like this image here. Okay, so the second scene in this work is titled Homeschool and Housework. So when I was planning out what I wanted the work to be in terms of its content, I was really adamant about making sure to include a scene of me engaging in homeschool with my children. That's like our norm. But just looking at it from the context that this work was made during the pandemic. And so a lot of parents were kind of thrust into being homeschoolers against their will. So even though that was our norm, I wanted to kind of hint at that because that was the experience of a lot of parents at the time, like all over the world, just kind of this idea of like, one, not being able to go into the office, number two, having the kids at home, trying to work with them, doing homeschool and do whatever your responsibilities for your job. And then just kind of, again, just dealing with all the craziness that was happening in the world at the time. So this piece, I really wanted to kind of hit home on this idea of carving out time. It also touches on the idea of like multitasking. So you can see I'm at the table trying to help my son with his homeschool lesson. The other child's on the floor, things all scattered around. And also like I'm trying to like fold laundry at the same time. Also, I was really specific about the other things that are included in this space. So there's a bookshelf. Just to kind of to hint at this idea of like learning in academia. There's a diploma on the wall to hint at that as well. There's a calendar with sticky notes, just kind of thinking about timekeeping and the to-do list. And then just thinking about the theme of this work, carving out time, right? So I had to carve out time to get things done in the day, but also literally the act of carving out time, right? So the physical act of carving out from these wood panels over this extended period of time. Something else that I want to mention briefly that you'll see throughout the work is that there's references to other artists in the piece. And so that is my way, number one, to kind of live vicariously through my artwork because I really can't afford any of these pieces to be in my house. But it's another way for me to talk about, one, my views on the importance of being a collector. I think as an artist, it's important to engage in collecting as well. And then number three is to honor like my foremothers and other artists who have influenced my practice in some way. So if you look on the top of the bookshelf, there is a sculpture there. That sculpture is titled Seated Woman, another work by Elizabeth Catlett. She is an amazing printmaker, but also a phenomenal sculptor. And then on the wall, just to the side of my figure, is a print by Margaret Burroughs, so one of my favorite prints by her. And I think it's really interesting, like the artworks interact with the viewers. So at this point, like none of the people that live in this space are interacting with you, but the artwork is interacting with you, the viewer. The next scene in this work is titled Dinner Time. And so it kind of just represents like the hump part of the day or the midway part of the day. So I was really specific in the construction of these images, thinking about my figure in the work because I'm showing you through like my lens how I'm experiencing the day. If we were to do it through my children's lens or my husband's lens, like things might look a little bit different. So in most of the most of the scenes, I generally have like the most dynamic pose. So like in the bedroom scene, my arm is outstretched. In the office scene, I'm reaching across the table, interacting with my son. And then in this work, this is the only panel where I'm actually standing up. And that is kind of because my body makes like an arc throughout the day. It's also to kind of like show this like arc of time as well. Something else I want to mention about this work is that I purposely put myself and my husband in the middle of the composition. just to show that we're both like engaged and active in the family. I think I'm talented and I can do all these things, but I can't do them on my own. So really taking that moment to honor him. And I also realized like after I was doing all of my sketches, I realized like my husband and I aren't doing anything together in the work. So I really wanted to put this Kerry James Marshall piece to kind of reflect the relationship between us. That work is titled Club Couple, one of my favorite like Kerry James Marshall pieces, but it's also like representative of our relationship as well. And then the other work that I want to highlight here is a piece by Valerie Maynard, one of my favorite pieces of hers. But I also was really specific in terms of the placement of this work because it matches my silhouette in the composition too. And then there's so many ways that I could talk about this work. I really wanted to challenge myself just with the carving in and of itself. So I wanted to include like lots of different types of surface textures. As you can see in this space, like the granite countertop and the chairs and the floor and the rug and the carpet. So I wanted to include as many different types of surface textures as a way to kind of challenge myself in that regard. And also just kind of thinking about like, basic drawing things like perspective and proportion. So, and that's really kind of indicative of like the checkerboard floor. You can tell that it's kind of going back in space. And then the fourth scene of this work is Bedtime for the Boys. And so I think this is like the rallying point for all parents. Like, let's get these kids to bed. Let's make it happen. So this kind of represents some of our like rituals and traditions as a family. Again, this work was done over the period of like between 2020 and 2021. So our children were a bit younger then. So we don't, do the bedtime story now. They read on their own. But at the time, this was like our tradition. So on the bed, I'm reading Baby Bear with my son Ade, which is one of their favorite books at the time by Kadir Nelson, a really amazing Black illustrator and author. And then you can see my son is playing with Theo. And this space is really significant because I wanted to think about each of the rooms as their own characters as well, not just the people, but each of the rooms are a character in this narrative. So this room, I really wanted it to make it feel like it was the boys' space. So they got to choose like their pajamas that they're wearing. They also were participatory by choosing the artworks of theirs that I include on the wall. So those are actually like some of their own artworks that are included in the work. There is a reference to my husband, and his artwork is above the headboard. And then we have a reference to Basquiat, which is one of the boys' favorite artists. It was my husband's idea to put the Basquiat in there because at first I was like really resistant. I'm like, nobody is going to actually put a Basquiat in their children's bedroom. But I found this image and, it worked out perfectly. There's also just kind of represents our aspirations for our children. So on the far wall, there's a map which represents our desire for our children to see and experience the world. And then also, if you look on the carpet, there is a Sankofa bird hidden in the carpet. Well, not hidden, but it's in the carpet. And so that symbol, it's another Adinkra symbol, but it means look back, to move forward. So that kind of represents our aspirations for them as well. Okay, and now we get to game time, right? So after all the things are done in the day, the kids are put to bed, now I get to shift out of my role as mom and shift into my role as artist. And so that is indicative of, now you can see like I have on different shoes, the fuzzy house slippers are gone, right? I have on studio shoes, I also have on a robe. And so this space, I really wanted to just give you a look and insight into my life as an artist. And particularly thinking about my identity as a painter and as a printmaker. So there are things that are really indicative of those two aspects of myself. So on the floor, there's a wood block in progress. So if you can look back to the beginning of the presentation, that is an actual work. It was in progress, now it's finished. And I'm sitting on this chair with a painter's palette. Again, that references my idea as a painter, but it also is another nod to Kerry James Marshall. So one of my other favorite paintings by him is an untitled painting of a woman. She's in her studio with a big painting palette. So I kind of, am hinting at that work as well, just another reference to Kerry James Marshall. But as you look around this space, you can see there are different works in progress, some that are finished, some that are in progress at the time. There's like my stool there that I roll around on the floor in paint tubes, paint brushes. So just giving you kind of an overall look into my life as an artist. So I'm going to show this little bit of slide. So thanks to my husband, there is a wonderful video kind of showing the behind the scenes making of this work. So if you're curious about that, you can see that video. It's on view in the gallery. You can also view it on my YouTube channel. But I'm just gonna show like the last minute of that video, just so you can see like what all the works look like as they span across, like together. Okay, all right, well, thank you. So these next slides just kind of show just some gallery images of the work. So this is from the Frisch Art Museum. So earlier this year, the panels were on view there. And then here you can see images of the prints on view. So these were, a set of the prints has also been acquired by the Harvard Art Museum. So there was a show there earlier this year as well. Okay, moving on. I'm gonna, before I get into my next section, which is kind of touches on this idea of renewal, the intention of making time for joy, I'm gonna read again another excerpt from the book. It says, children offer us the best demonstrations of what it means to set aside time for joy, or using African concepts, weaving time for joy throughout our days. I wonder how our lives would change if we approached our days like my 9-year-old. Yes, we have work to go. Yes, we have to go to work. Yes, we have 50 million other necessary things to do during our days. But what if what if those only served as a backdrop to the things we are really focused on? What if we planned for all our joy moments, made a list of the things that we plan to do in a day that will bring us joy and serve our souls? So again, that brings me to this next point, the intention of making time for joy. So I'm going to go back to this print earlier that I showed, kind of demonstrating the printmaking process. It's titled A Moment of Care. So I've been just kind of really thinking about how I can infuse these kind of small everyday moments of joy just into my daily life. We don't all have time to go take a 3-day weekend at the spa sometimes, so we can think about how we can just have these little moments of joy. And so one of those small moments for me are scented candles, right? So this is just a simple act of me taking a moment to light a candle and smell it. That's really important to me. Like whenever I go into my studio, I always light a candle before I get to work, just to kind of set the mood and the atmosphere, and also in my home as well. This next work is titled Flourish. For me, this also just represents the idea of making time for joy. So that could be as simple as stopping, resting, take a moment to open your window and look out and just enjoy the sunshine. This is a portrait of an artist named Mahari Jabara. She ran a group in Baltimore titled Studio House recently, and so I was invited to kind of be a visiting artist there, and it was such a great experience that I kind of wanted to document her in this space. This work was also on view at the Frisch earlier, so I'm kind of including this just to kind of give you an idea of the scale. This next piece is titled Jeanette's Daughters. This is actually a group of actual sisters. So Jeanette is actually Pastor Jeanette Howard. She was a pastor of a church that I went to in college. And so this piece kind of, one, reminds me of the intention of making joy, like through being and interacting with family. But it also kind of goes back to this idea of legacy and the idea of the matriarch. So at the time when I was going to church in Pastor Jeanette's church, all of these now grown women were like little, like girls and babies. And so a couple of years ago, I recently saw this image that she posted of them. It's kind of this, it was this full circle moment for me, like thinking of them and being around them as little children, but now kind of seeing them as adults. And so they're all kind of connected in the image. But I also, some other elements that I included were like ivy, just to kind of playing on this idea of like connectedness, because like once ivy sticks to something, like it connects to it. So they're all also connected in this photo as well. And then the symbol in the back is called the akoma, and it means conjoined hearts. So again, thinking about their relationship and bond as sisters. Here's a detail of their work, so you can kind of see a little bit of the line and mark making up close. Again, just kind of thinking about this idea of the intention of joy through connection. This piece is titled Aaron and Anayia with Hydrangeas. And this is a portrait of my stepdaughter, Erin, and one of my nieces. So in a lot of my recent works, I've been really incorporating not only like pattern, but also foliage and flowers, just to kind of play on this idea of flourishing or thriving. Flowers are also another form of self-care for me. Okay. It's another image. This next piece is titled Sunday Morning. So a lot of these works were also on display at the exhibition that I had at the Frisch Art Museum. And so because they were showing Carving Out Time, when I was thinking about what other works I wanted to include in the show, I was really thinking about, well, if I could continue carving out time, like what was missing from the day that I would add now? And so my first thought was a moment where I am resting. So in all of those scenes, I'm like active doing things, like even in the studio. But here is Sunday morning, it's just kind of reflection of that. Again, this idea of self-care. We have a like Sunday morning tradition at home. Like every Sunday morning, I make a big breakfast. But here is a moment where I am able to just kind of sit in my fuzzy house robe and fuzzy slippers with, again, a bouquet of flowers, which represents like self-care for me. Again, this work is another just example of thinking about my identity as a painter and printmaker. So if I kind of break down a little bit about how this work was made, it's all kind of traditional painting, and like the chairs are collaged and painted. But if you look at kind of the texture of the robe, that's actually carved into the surface. So I did like an initial layer of carving, rolling paint over it, and then carving again, just to kind of represent that texture. And also the pattern, like in the wall, if you can see that, it's carved as well. And then the last piece that I'm going to talk about is Pinnacle, right? So also kind of thinking about what was missing from the day. And so just some like activity time with just father and son. So this piece, again, is titled Pinnacle. If you're from Little Rock, you can kind of guess where this reference is from. It's from Pinnacle Mountain State Park. And so this was our first time climbing Pinnacle Mountain as a family. And the boys were really proud of themselves because they made it to the top. We were gonna like climb up the easy side, but we like got lost and climbed up the hard side by accident. So it was a really like triumphant thing for them. So we just took some time and like stayed at the top of the mountain and captured some images of them. So this piece again is acrylic and on carved wood panels. So I'll kind of show you like a close-up. So again, it's just still the same process. So again, me thinking about like my identity as a painter and a printmaker. But this work in particular, it kind of, if I think about like the two print processes that it reminds me of, it kind of toggles between how you would make a woodcut in terms of the way that it's carved, but also an etching. So if you've done etching to create the image, you burn images into a plate, but then you push ink into the edges, the places where it's activated, and then you kind of wipe away the rest to create the image when it's printed. So I kind of did that here. So I did like all of the initial carving, as you've seen in some of the other images, but I kind of took the time to kind of activate it more with color. So in the lines, those are carved, but I took time to like literally push paint into every places that was carved, wipe the residue away, inked it up on top so that you have these differences in color. And this piece also just kind of represents like my husband, again, and his importance in our family. So kind of in the center of this composition, triumphant, and also just kind of the nurturing relationship that he has with our sons and the protector that he is of our children. And there's them. This was also on view at the Frisch Art Museum. Okay, I think I've gone way over my time. So those are all my images. What's next? Obviously the show that's here now. It's on view until January 5th. And then also in March of next year, I'll be at the IFPDA fair with Black Women of Print. And here's my information if you guys want to stay connected. Thank you for your time. Oh, okay. Sorry.
We have time for questions, so if anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and either Pedro or I will come to you with the microphone. So any questions, please raise your hand. Okay, excuse me. Thank you. I'm gonna get my exercise. Here you go. Yes.
Thank you very much for everything you shared. So what do you work from? You can't just have memory. Do you have photographs? Who's doing the photographs? Or do you do sketches? Or where do you get the imagery solidified?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, my husband supports me in that capacity. He's a really amazing artist, also a talented photographer. So he does a lot of the photography work for me. I also photograph people, so sometimes if I see somebody and they're in passing, I'm like, hey, can I, do a painting of you? Some people think you're like strange or whatever, but some people, let you photograph them. But, because a lot of my subjects are all like family, friends, we are kind of in Baltimore by ourselves. So I do have to rely on photo references a lot for my images. But I think speaking on that and kind of stepping to my role as an educator, I think just my practice of drawing from life a lot helps me to be able to like change things as I need to. So for example, with Carving Out Time, each of those scenes was like made of maybe 5 to 6 different photo references. So kind of picking and choosing things from separate images to kind of construct them together. Yeah.
Thank you. You talk about being a mom and an artist, and you said that like you do the prints at nighttime while they're asleep. How long does it take you to make one individual print?
Well, that depends largely on the scale of things. So if it's something small, like, can I start over? If it's something, go back to the beginning. So if it's something like, okay, I'll go to this. Yeah, so like this one. So I could probably carve and do an edition of these like in maybe 2 or 3 days or a week or so. But this is like small. It's like a 24 by 18. And actually I made this print. I was a visiting artist at Austin Peay University in Tennessee. So yeah, I had like a week to be there. So I had to knock it out and get it done. But something like the works that are on view, like these works. So this whole project, if I go back, okay. So this whole like series is like really large, right? So it took a big investment of time. So I worked on that thing like over the course of a whole year. Again, that's a pandemic year, which is almost like 2 years in regular life. I was also on sabbatical, so I had like a lot of like extra time to put in the work. And then, as I mentioned, my husband is amazing and really supportive, and so he just saw the kind of power and the possibility of this work. So he was like all in. So he just gave me the freedom and liberty to work whenever I needed to. So he kind of was like, in single parent mode, for a little bit during the time of making this work. But yeah, so like small prints, I can get them done in a pretty quick time. But again, like I've been doing this for like a long time. So I started really getting into woodcut around 2009, 2010. So, it's taken time to be able to develop the skill to be able to work quickly with the medium. Thank you for your question.
I can speak loud enough.
Okay, I got it, for the recording, for history. Okay, this is huge, and I heard upstairs that you brought the press into your studio versus taking your panels to the press, which I'd love to hear more about. But looking at this, did you carve these in 3 separate panels and then print them as 3 separate panels, then mount them into one large piece?
No, I worked on them. So in this image here is how they were on the wall. So after I painted them black, like separately, because these are all made of each scene is made of 3 separate pieces of wood that are 8 by 4 foot tall. So if you put them together, that's how we get the dimensions of it being 8 feet tall, 4 feet wide. So no, once they were up on the wall, I did everything at once. So my husband helped me come up with a system to use Velcro to tape the panels to the wall. So after they were painted, the 3 panels were on the wall together exactly as you see them now. I did all the drawing on the wall, all the carving on the wall. And then once they were done, I took them down. And then I did each scene like that. And then they were printed on an 8 by 4 foot press bed, if that makes sense.
So the width of the whole panel. So there's actually, once you've made your print, you actually have 3 separate pieces of paper there that then you mount together to create one image.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Just like this is 3 separate pieces of wood. Mm-hmm. Thank you. If you look closely, you can kind of see the seams. And so like here, there's like one seam. And then I had to plan out the drawing so that everywhere that there is a seam and like where 2 pieces of board or wood get together, that's either like where a door meets or where something like structural happens, so that it wouldn't be like super noticeable where the seams are.
Hey, Mommy. So, what kind of art did you like to do when you were little?
So when I was little, I didn't have a lot of like different types of art media and supplies like you guys have access to. So I did just like basic things like charcoal and like graphite. In school, like in junior high though, I did like pastel. And also like I struggled as a painter when I decided I was gonna be a painting major. It was really hard for me to like get the grasp of using oil and kind of painting. But I remembered like I could do pastel really well. And so I was doing a pastel drawing in one of my drawing classes, and my painting professor happened to come in there and he was like, okay, if you can just do what you're doing now, but with the paint, then you'll be good to go. And I was like, oh, okay. So really like taking my knowledge of how pastel worked, but just kind of translating that to a different medium really helped me to understand how to paint. And I think about that same thing with my printmaking and painting work now. So the knowledge that I have about myself as a painter, I kind of translate that through the medium of printmaking too.
Okay.
Thank you. That was a good question, buddy.
You identify that you're both a painter and a printmaker. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to wrap my brain around how difficult it would be to go from painting, where you are looking at the image, and then the printmaking. Don't you have to some sort of reverse the thing? Mm-hmm. How difficult was that?
That's a good question. So normally people like reverse their imagery and in terms of like the medium of printmaking, because whatever you print is going to be a reverse image, as you'll see in the gallery, right? So if you like look at the panels, the works on paper are kind of flipped, just like your hands, right? So if this is your block, this is your paper, you print, then they're like opposite, right? So printmaking works the same way. So I don't really take the time to reverse the images. I don't know, I kind of like the surprise of how it will look. So for me, it almost makes it like for real, like a different piece than what I've been drawing. That's also why you don't really see any text in my work at all, because if you do text, you have to carve it reversed and backwards so that when it's printed, it shows the right way, right? And that was really important to me when I was thinking about the two versions of carving out time. Because initially I wasn't, like, the goal wasn't to print them at all. They were supposed to be like a mixed media painting. But through the wisdom and the counsel of my husband, he encouraged me to like just put in the extra time to have them printed and have them, you know, two sets of the work. So when I had to make that decision, it kind of changed how I was thinking about the work. And so like if I'm doing a mixed media piece and I'm doing like carving and painting and collage, if there's a place where I'm going to be collaging, I don't do any carving there because it's going to get covered up with paper, right? So if you think about like, trying to go back to like these images here. So where my mom's shirt is, that's paper. Like I printed on this paper, hand printed it, and took the paper and collaged it onto the paper and then painted it so that it has like the volume and depth and it doesn't look flat. So I didn't do any carving there because it's just gonna get covered up, right? So the only place I actually carved is like the hands and the face and the neck. But so initially carving out time was going to be like this, just like a mixed media piece. But when I decided that it was going to be printed, I had to consider it in a different way. So if it's going to be like a function as a like print, like a traditional print, you have to think about every surface of the block because whatever you don't activate, it's just going to be a black space. So I definitely didn't want like one piece to look great and then the other piece to look shabby, right? You just can't go out like that. So I had to really like carve like every single thing so that when I did the prints would look great and look like how I wanted to do in the vision. But after I saw like that first panel and that first scene and it was fully carved, I just decided that it didn't need anything else. I was like, this is just powerful enough on its own. But in I guess the first part of your question, kind of thinking about like me bridging the gap between myself as a painter and printmaker, I think that comes into how I'm thinking about the development of the imagery. So when I draw or paint anything, I really think about it more in terms of like tonal recognition. So I see like shifts and change in tonal values. I see that well as a painter. And so I just take that and translate it through not like continuous tone, kind of get into some drawing terms, right? So if you like have a piece of charcoal and you're drawing with it, you kind of shade it so that it's like the tone is continuous. There's no break as values change from light to dark. So I'm doing that same thing, but translating that through line. So now it becomes linear tonality. So like I change, to get those changes in value and depth, I'm either changing the direction of the line, I'm changing the spacing of the line, like how close or how far away the line is, or I'm changing like the direction of the line or the texture, or like changing the width of the tool. So like on the bedspread, it's like a white bedspread, so that means I have to carve away more. So I get a larger tool, carve away more where it's bright, I carve away less where it's darker, and same thing. So I'm still thinking about it in the same way that I would develop a painting, but except I'm just using a different tool. So it's kind of like if you think about a movie, right? A movie is the same regardless of what language you translate it in. The essence of the movie is the same, whether you look at it in French or Spanish or whatever, the core idea of the movie is still there, it's just in a different medium. If that makes sense, sorry.
Yes, I had a question regarding, one thing I noticed about your piece is that you have a lot of symbols and like patterns, in your work. And I'm curious as to, how do you, what is your thought process around, how do you select those symbols and those patterns? And, how does it connect to the composition of the piece, so it's not so overbearing or so it's a part of the piece. Mm-hmm. What's your thought process around that?
Yeah, so I kind of go back to this piece since I can use this one as an example. So early in my kind of graduate school years, and this is like maybe around 2010, 2011, I was looking for ways to kind of push my identity as a figurative artist. So I was never really willing to compromise on the figure. That's like something that is important to me. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of Black artists, when they go to graduate school, they're kind of swayed to do different things or like question about why are you doing identity-based work? So that was something that I was never gonna compromise on. Like the figure is important, it's there. Like you just have to deal with these figures in your face. But as an artist, you still want to think about ways to push yourself and to develop yourself. And number one, if you're a figurative artist, you should be continuing or adding something to that conversation about figurative art. So I was really looking for ways to kind of, just to evolve. And I eventually kind of stumbled into kind of pattern. A lot of these patterns are Adinkra symbols. So they're, most from West African culture. And so this like a visual language or visual symbolic language just has different meanings, right? And so sometimes I'm choosing a symbol because of the meaning and how it relates to the person or either what I'm trying to express in the work. And then sometimes I just think it looks cool. And it's also like just my fashion sense. I like bold patterns and things too. So, got the stripes on today. So often, like you'll see me just with patterns. So initially they started with like Adinkra symbols. That's kind of an inspiration from that. But now like I can kind of take patterns from lots of different things. And so sometimes in, like when I'm doing people's clothing or different things, sometimes I might, if they have on a plain shirt, I might change it and add a pattern. Just so, just some other type of visual interests. So with this particular pattern, obviously, now that I have to talk about it, the name of it escapes me, but the meaning is, directly connected to what I'm trying to show in this work. Or even like this piece is a Guyanimi. I think it means except for God. So it's like a symbol expressing the omnipotence of God. So it relates to this because I'm talking about like my sense of spirituality and kind of my religious upbringing, so.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. So I love that you shared, I was here for the luncheon this morning where we had a panel with you and your family. You talk a lot about your family and your work. Can you talk to how you got to a place where you can advocate for yourself as an artist and a wife, and how that translates into how you handle residencies or exhibitions? I'm curious to just hear how you got there and what practices you can share for other mother artists.
Yeah, so I think it's ironic because I really purposely did not talk about myself as a mother in my artist, like earlier in my career. I would say that maybe 2019, 2020 is the first time where I showed a work like talking about myself as a mother. And I kind of, going back to like my pregnancy, my first pregnancy, like I experienced a lot of fear. And that fear was just like, okay, let me paint the picture for you. So I just finished graduate school, got my first real job, moved to Baltimore to take my teaching position at MICA. And I think living in my nice little loft apartment. And then I think like at the end of my second semester of teaching, I found out I was going to be having my first son. And so that just really, I just got really fearful. And I had to question myself of like where that fear came from. Because it's not like anybody said anything to me, but I just kind of started to question, am I going to lose my job? Are they going to hire me back again next semester? Like how, just all these like things like questioning myself. And so I purposely didn't make work about that. And I also kind of beat myself about not making as much work as I thought I was supposed to be making at the time, especially when my second son came. I had 2 children under 5 and I'm just like, you need to be doing more. But I kind of got to this point where like I shouldn't have to hide parts of myself in order to be successful. So I'm a mom. This is my life. These are my kids. We're a package deal. Like you just have to deal with it. And I think one of the most powerful things about my work is like the vulnerability and the relatability. And yeah, so I just got to a place where it's like, this is what it is. Like either you accept it or not. And in terms of like dealing with residencies and things, I do really have to consider them first in everything that I do. Like there's nothing, especially when they were younger, like I couldn't make any decision about what to do without considering them, whether it's like what time I go to the grocery store, what my teaching schedule is going to be, if I can take this residency or not. But I've been really fortunate, again, just thinking about my husband, like the team and partnership that we have, the things that we've been able to do together. I do have like some privilege because I am a college professor. I get like the summers off. I get a long like winter break. So when I do take residencies, I try to plan it like in the summer if I can. Every now and then, if it's something significant, I can maybe like ask, like I'm, teaching full time right now. So I had to like cut my Thursday class off short so I can fly in Thursday night to be here for Friday morning. So I just feel like you have to like, one, just have a support system, some people that really like support you, whether that's like your family or the family that you choose. I think that's really important. And then just like, I don't know, just letting people know like it's a unit. It's like even when people ask me to come places, I'm like, okay, well, my kids are here. Like, what's the room situation going to be? Like, we need at least 2 beds or 2 rooms. Like, what, And I think if people respect you and they want your work there enough, then like they'll make room for you.